You might go when you're single, I don't want to pay for that. I understand that screws me over. If I get sick and can't work, I understand that. But if you've got a spouse who's dependent on you, if you've got kids and you don't have life insurance and income protection, and I'm assuming you're not financially free, that is straight up reckless and you need to check yourself.
Welcome to Checks and Balances. I'm Michael Vincent. This is James Blair. And today, major money milestones to accomplish in your 30s.
We're talking about your 30s today, baby.
How far into your 30s are you, James?
I'm 33. How old are you, Mike?
18.
Yep. The Botox is making it look that way. Don't laugh, Ravi. Yeah, very naughty. So today's episode, there's a lot happening in your 30s, isn't there?
There is.
So with all those moving pieces, your income's starting to go up, but you got all these costs. So we're going to talk about all the things that you need to do in your 30s to make sure you get where you need to get to. So we've got 5 steps that we're going to talk through today to set yourself up long-term for wealth and a stable future. Mike, what are those 5 steps?
First point has got to be have a financial plan.
Number 2, establish an emergency fund.
3, my favorite, avoiding that lifestyle inflation.
Number 4, those kiddies are coming. Prepare for parental leave.
And number 5, getting on the property ladder.
Okay, so we're going to talk about those in a lot more detail. However, Mike, statistically, apparently, the most expensive year in your life is 31. Does that surprise you?
No, it doesn't surprise me. I'm just trying to think what I was doing when I get to 31, what I will be doing.
You got 13 years to think about.
Yeah, I know. What was I doing at 31? I think I was moving back to New Zealand. Yeah, it was mid-COVID. I was moving back to New Zealand. It was a pretty expensive. Yeah, I bought a house. Yeah, it was a pretty expensive year.
So a survey was done by ClearScore of 3,000 people that found that age 31 is typically the most expensive year due to major life events such as 27% got married, 25% bought a house, 20% had a baby, and 14% paying for a honeymoon. There's some 31-year-olds who are adulting pretty hard.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's kind of that time when it's a real transitional period. Some people tuck into, the marriage and the honeymoon and that sort of stuff a little bit earlier, which is a very big expense and arguably isn't going to get a great ROI over time if you look at the stats. But I think really importantly here is if you're ticking these things off, it's about having that financial plan.
Okay, so let's go into some of these costs a little bit more in terms of how they're covering them. So 60% had savings to cover expenses, which is pretty bloody good.
Yeah.
I don't think this is a New Zealand study at all. 33% of the 25 to 34-year-olds relied on parental help. Mike, what percentage of your clients do you reckon are relying on parents for help when it comes to buying a home?
Yeah, well, buying their first home, in their 30s, you're still getting a pretty large percentage of people who are. And it's not huge, but it's definitely, and it's usually in the form of a loan that they're paying back. But I'd say definitely a large percentage. Yeah.
An alarming stat, though, is how the rest funded it. So 20% of under 34s use credit for large purchases, which your boy's going to hate. Now, those that are over 35, only 8% use credit. So that's not too surprising, right? If you're a little bit older, you've had a good income for a period of time, you're less likely to use these bad debts. But Mike, for those that are using the bad debts for holidays, honeymoons, personal loans for weddings, it's a dangerous cycle.
It is a dangerous cycle. And I guess it comes down to the want versus the need. And what are you prepared to sacrifice for the want or the need, right? And do I need to go on holiday? No, but it is nice to go on holiday. And if I want to go on holiday, how am I going to pay for that? And if you're thinking, I'm just going to slap it all on the credit card and I'll pay it off over the next 12 months, wrong way to do it.
Yeah, I have heard examples of that recently where people have gone, I'm going to go on a holiday, drop 10 grand on a credit card and just deal with it later and make the minimum repayments, right?
Yeah, it is a very common thing. And we talk about this quite a bit. Afterpays, credit cards, personal loans, just avoid them, right?
Yeah.
You don't need it. And again, if you're in your 30s and you're thinking, I need to kickstart this and I really need to get things going, you're listening to this episode going, great, let's crack into it. The first thing you should be thinking is, do I have any of these debts hanging around? And how do I pay them off? And if you're thinking, everyone's going to Bali for this overseas wedding and I'm going to have to slap it on a credit card, you're just not going to be able to go to the wedding.
Yeah, it's as simple as no. And if you say yes, then you're doing what other people want you to do opposed to what you want to do. And that's a whole different episode. Now, let's go back to those 5 points, right? So we've spoken about the things going on in your 30s, how it's getting funded. Point number one, having a financial plan. Now you might go, James, I'm in my 30s. Financial plans are for rich peoples in their 50s and 60s. Newsflash. How do you reckon people got rich? They didn't get rich by just like rocking up and then eventually they got to an age and they were like, well, I guess I'm wealthy now. They had a plan. And in your 30s, you've kind of had your 20s where you've had some fun. Now in your 30s, you're planning for the longer term, right? And whether you're single or whether you're in a couple, it is about going, what do I want to achieve financially, both short term and long term, and putting a step-by-step plan in place to make sure you get there.
And what is the first bit of achieving that step-by-step plan? A budget. Now, budgeting, we say it time and time again, it gets a bad rap. We are not telling you you can't do this and you can't do this and you can't have fun. What we're saying is start with the goals and then work out how you're going to get there. And the way you're going to do that is a budget, and make sure that budget is in place and make sure you are sticking to it.
Because rich people don't have budgets. But do you know who does? Wealthy people. Rich doesn't last. Wealth is for the long term. If you have a budget, if you know where your money is going, the goal that you're working towards, you're much more likely to get there. Now, the really big thing, right, is it's about 20% knowledge, it's 80% behavior. So you need to not make sure you get motivated at a point in time, but you've got accountability, you've got systems and processes in place that you're going to stick to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Number two, saving an emergency fund. So if you do not have good financial foundations, something is going to go wrong in life. And if you are not well set up, it's all going to fall over and you're going to be screwed. You're going to go back to bad debts. You're going to get demotivated. It's all going to turn to custard. Mike, what size emergency fund should we be aiming for?
We usually recommend that people have between 3 and 6 months of expenses in their emergency fund. And, that can vary on the type of work you do. Are you commission-based? Is your income a bit lumpy? Are you self-employed? If your income isn't consistent as a PAYE salary income, you're just going to have to have a little bit more in that emergency fund. The bank needs to be a little bit bigger.
Yeah, and you've just got to remember you've got more responsibility in your 30s, right? We're talking kids, we're talking mortgages, we're talking houses where things go wrong, cars break down. There's just more moving pieces, much more risk. And if you fail to prepare, just be prepared to fail.
Yeah, 100%. Tip number 3, avoiding lifestyle inflation. Now, this is what we see all the time. People get a pay rise and they go, oh, great, I'm richer. I'm going to go spend it. They spend the money before they get it and they don't adjust their goals, savings, plan, budget to account for that new income.
I hate when people get a pay rise and they're like, oh, I deserve these things. You don't deserve anything. You deserve your future self to have that life that you really want, right? And if you just give in to those fancier cars, those luxuries, those nice holidays, all those kinds of things, where you just do it all the time and there's no plan that you're working to, you are going to be working to the day you die. So managing lifestyle creep is super duper important.
Yeah, and I think a really key point here with lifestyle creep and maybe the younger generations is talking about, comparing yourself to everyone on Instagram where they are prettier, funnier, and richer than you are. It is not real life. You should not be comparing yourself to them. They are 0.0001% of the population who don't live in the real world.
Before we move on, we talk all the time about planning and growing our wealth, but protecting that wealth is just as important. That's why having the right insurance in place can help when life goes unexpectedly.
And that's why this episode is brought to you by Partners Life, a New Zealand operated award-winning insurance provider with over 300,000 Kiwis insured and 89% of claims paid.
Partners Life understand that having some insurance is better than having no insurance. They have flexible and personalized solutions for any budget or situation.
Check out their website in our show notes below.
So a real key there in terms of managing lifestyle creep is before you get the salary increase, set up the structure. So say you get a $10,000 pay rise, maybe you want to keep $2,000 or $3,000 for your lifestyle to move up a little bit. The rest should be going towards increased automatic payments, to investments, to paying down debt, to emergency funds, whatever it might be. If you wait a couple of pay runs, you will get used to it and you'll be like, there's no way I could have ever lived without this money. So you need to set up the structure before you get paid.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, number 4, you've got to prepare for kids. A lot of people in their 30s will have children and you need a plan. If you think about it, and it depends on the business you work for or your situation, right? Kids, they're not accelerating your wealth. They're stopping your wealth creation. And you need to have a plan to make sure that if you're, not going forwards, at least you're not going backwards too far.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's about, again, coming back to that budget. if you've got kids on the horizon, you've got to make sure your budget is prepared, your savings plan is in place. And, we've talked, with Kat from Kernel about this quite a bit, the journey into, having kids and what that looks like. And, a really great episode there that if you are thinking about it, definitely check it out.
The other thing you need to do is talk to your spouse. So make sure opposed to just having kids, there's a conversation around, okay, is our current car still good? If we've got kids, we need to pay for all of these things before kids arrive. We want to take this much time off work. We've got mortgage repayments. How are we going to make it work? And essentially go, what is our financial position going to look like over the next 12 months? Work out how much you're going backwards, and then you need to save that amount, right? Otherwise, there is the huge risk you go into credit cards, you miss mortgage repayments, you put that on top of interest rates increasing, you're carrying a hell of a lot of risk. So you do not want to be that person. You do not want to be, tired and not getting any sleep, dealing with a new board and thinking about your finances. You want to enjoy that period.
Yeah, and as well as talking about this, and as well as talking about the savings and making sure you've got that plan in place, there's a couple of other things you have to think about there. Childcare costs, what's happening with that. Insurances, making sure you've got appropriate insurances in place. And, say it all the time, love talking about the fun stuff, but you've got to have that safety net underneath as well.
Yeah, making sure you've got a will now. Obviously, there's a question if anything happened to you, what would happen to the kids? Life insurance, income protection. You might go when you're single, I don't want to pay for that. I understand that screws me over if I get sick and can't work. I understand that. But if you've got a spouse who's dependent on you, if you've got kids and you don't have life insurance and income protection, and I'm assuming you're not financially free, that is straight up reckless and you need to check yourself. Number 5, Mike, getting onto the property ladder. How did you get this one in the list?
It's the ladder we all want to be on. It's the property ladder, right? So you're in your 30s, you don't own a home. Hopefully you've got some KiwiSaver sitting there, some savings. You've got to think, right, now's the time that I'm going to put the foot to the floor and get on the ladder as soon as I can. And there is a ton of different ways you can do it, but really the biggest benefit to being on the property ladder is the wealth appreciation over time, right? The value of that asset is going to grow. And the longer you are in the market, the bigger the gains are going to be.
And the reality is, if you don't buy a house when you're in your 30s and you wait till your 40s, house prices double every 10 years, right? That $1 million house is going to go into a $2 million house. And we know incomes ain't growing at the same level. Like Mike said, the financial plan we take everybody through is you build good financial foundations, you get onto the property ladder, you pay down debt quickly, you leverage up, buy investment properties. To get all of that moving, that step of getting onto the property ladder is where it all gets going. And if you do not know what financial position you need to be in to be able to buy a house, talk to Mike, talk to a mortgage broker, because how often does the conversation happen where you go, you're good to go because they've been contributing to KiwiSavers, they've got good incomes, and the person had no idea.
Yeah, and the later that you leave it, the conversations that I have with you, everyone comes to me with these wild ideas that they now have to swing for the fence. You know what I mean? Like everyone's like, why don't I do 2 investment properties here and put a company structure in here and do this crazy thing over here? I'm like, you just need to buy an owner-occupied house, right? And it just needs to be somewhere you want to live. Doesn't have to be the Ritz, doesn't have to be Ponsonby, doesn't have to be, in the best school zone or something like that, but you've just got to get on the ladder.
Yeah, just buy like a $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 new build townhouse and then deal with it all later. You can get into your dream home down the track, but don't run before you can walk.
100%.
Cool. So let's wrap this one up. So there's a lot happening in your 30s, right? There's a lot of big milestones happening in your 30s. There's about a big cost happening, but you got to get things moving forward. You got to make sure you're planning and saving for emergencies, staying away from bad debt, and you've got those good financial foundations.
My biggest takeaway for this one is probably the lifestyle creep, right? Like, of course you should have a plan, but please, 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 in your 30s, your career really starts to accelerate. And if you aren't controlling the pace at which you're spending and it just keeps going up with those increases in salary, you're never going to get anywhere.
And the last thing I would say is just run your own race. You look on Instagram, people are starting businesses, buying property, moving overseas, having kids, doing all these things. We're talking about marriage and kids and all that kind of thing. If that's not important to you, work out what is important to you. Do not compare yourself to others. Like Warren Buffett says, focus on an inner scorecard, not an outer scorecard. Do not compare yourself to others. Run your own race, set your own goals, knock them out, and create your wealth. And you will have a very successful 30s And then in your 40s and 50s, you'll be thanking yourself you did it.
Yeah.
Much love to Partners Life for sponsoring this episode. Please review, like, and subscribe, and we will catch you next time.
Cheers.